I'm Asher, 40, and I've spent most of my life being the responsible one in my family. That usually means doing everything quietly, covering for mistakes no one else wants to admit, and watching my younger sister, Kala, get away with practically anything. Kala is 34, dramatic, entitled, and somehow always manages to make everyone feel like the problem. Growing up, she perfected the art of manipulation, crying when she wanted her way, turning our parents against me for the smallest things, and making every holiday about her. A few days before Thanksgiving, she sent me a text that made me want to throw my phone across the room. Asher, you're always so selfish. Just stay home this year. Thanksgiving is better without you, honestly. It was so perfectly cruel, in that passive-aggressive way she does. The kind that's coated in fake concern but dripping with judgment. Normally, I'd have ignored it or written back a polite rebuttal, but this year I had other plans. See, I knew Thanksgiving with Kala was never really about the family. It was about her feeling like the center of the universe. She had spent weeks messaging our parents about her menu ideas, how everyone should pitch in, and how stressful it was to manage it all. And let's be honest, she always exaggerated. But here's the thing she didn't know. I had quietly set aside a fund months ago to cover any potential holiday disasters. It wasn't much anyone knew about, $5,000 sitting in a separate account, just in case. Kala had no idea it existed, let alone that I could move it around at will. When she sent that text telling me to stay home, I smiled. I didn't reply. I just quietly reversed the transfer I'd made earlier that week to her account. $5,000 vanished. Not missing because of a mistake, not delayed. Vanished. And she had no idea. Thanksgiving morning started like any other. I made myself coffee, settled into the armchair by the window, and watched the day unfold. From afar, I could almost see her racing through the kitchen, checking the account on her phone, muttering under her breath about how incompetent the delivery services had become. By 10 a.m., the first text arrived. Asher, why is my account negative? Did you see this? I need to go shopping now. This is impossible. I didn't respond. I just leaned back and listened as the chaos started to build in her world. Kala had planned to handle the entire Thanksgiving herself this year. Turkey, pies, sides, even a few fancy dishes she read about online. She wanted full control, and I let her have it. All I had to do was watch the panic set in. By 11 a.m., she was sending frantic voice messages. Asher, please, tell me you didn't do this on purpose. I don't know how to fix this. The stores are packed. The turkey, the sides, everything. It wasn't just the money. It was the timing. The delivery service she relied on couldn't just show up with fresh produce at the last minute. Pies couldn't magically bake themselves. And yet, she had convinced herself she had everything under control until she realized she didn't. Around noon, I started getting updates from our parents. They were trying to remain calm, but even they could see her unraveling. She was running from the kitchen to the living room, phone in hand, making frantic calls to anyone who might be able to help her. The usually composed planner was now flustered, apologetic, and, best of all, completely exposed. By the time the first cousin arrived, the kitchen was chaos. A pot of soup boiled over, a few pans were scattered across the counter, and somehow a bag of cranberries had ended up spilled on the floor. She was muttering to herself, blaming everything on the unreliable stores and bad timing, while still insisting she had everything under control. And then the voicemail came through, the one that made me laugh so hard I almost choked on my coffee. Asher, please, I need you. The turkey isn't here, nothing is ready, and everyone's going to hate me. You have to help me figure this out. I paused it and just leaned back in my chair. For once, she wasn't in control. For once, I didn't have to explain, defend, or clean up after her mistakes. She was floundering in a storm of her own making, and she didn't even know it yet. I could hear the panic rising in her messages. By 1 p.m., she had gone from desperate to almost frantic. My parents were trying to calm her down, but she wouldn't listen. Everything had to be perfect, and she couldn't comprehend that perfection might not be possible, especially without her magic grocery fund. Then came the moment that made me realize just how far this was going to go. Kala picked up the phone and started dialing numbers in a frenzy, her voice shaking with panic. I don't care what it takes. Someone has to get me a turkey, or I'll have to tell everyone. And it will be your fault, Asher, because you left me to do this alone. I sat there, listening, a quiet grin on my face. The oven was still empty. The pies hadn't been started. The sides weren't even prepped. And she had no idea that the $5,000 she thought was hers had quietly returned to me hours ago. By 1:30 p.m., I was receiving updates from our parents almost in real time, even though I had no intention of showing up. They were caught in the middle of Kala's growing meltdown. My mom's voice over the phone sounded strained and frustrated. Asher, she's panicking. I don't know what to do. She's yelling at everyone on speakerphone. The neighbors probably think we're having some kind of emergency. Just let her flail, I said, smiling. It was therapeutic in a way I hadn't anticipated. She's had years of thinking she could run everything. Let's see what she does when nothing goes her way. Kala had always thrived on control. Every family gathering, she'd make sure the decorations, the menu, the seating arrangement, and even the flow of conversation worked exactly to her specifications. She convinced everyone, including my parents, that without her overseeing every detail, the holiday would collapse. And until today, I hadn't thought she'd ever experience what it was like to lose that control entirely. By 2 p.m., the situation had escalated from mere chaos to full-blown panic. She had attempted to go to the store herself, which quickly ended in disaster. According to my mom, she returned home frazzled, with only half the items on her list and nothing that resembled the turkey she promised. Asher, she's standing in the kitchen with raw vegetables in one hand and a grocery bag in the other, just shouting at the ceiling. My mom whispered over the phone. Oh, she's doing great, I said, sipping my coffee. The sounds of her failure, filtered through snippets from our parents, were almost cinematic. She was pacing back and forth, voice rising with every passing minute, talking to herself, checking the account over and over, muttering about how she had planned this for months and everything was ruined. And it was. She hadn't realized that the $5,000 transfer she counted on was never hers to begin with. In her eyes, the account should have covered all her extravagant plans, specialty pies, imported cranberry sauce, extra sides, and even the artisan bread she insisted on buying because it just felt right for the table. Now, with nothing left, everything fell apart. By 3 p.m., the first guest arrived. My cousin, Elliot, a quiet type who usually stays out of family drama, texted me with a mix of concern and disbelief. Asher, I don't know what's happening over there. Kala is screaming at mom about the groceries. Oven is empty, pie's not started. She's losing it. I couldn't help but grin. The fun part, I thought, was seeing her unravel so completely without realizing it was all a consequence of her own behavior. Well, and a little of my intervention. She had spent years belittling me, blaming me for everything she deemed inconvenient, and manipulating everyone around her. This was her moment. And yet, I wasn't prepared for just how far she'd go in her desperation. Around 3:15, my parents called me again. Their tone had shifted from concern to pleading. Asher, she's talking about canceling the dinner. She says she can't do it, and everyone will be angry. She's threatening to call the neighbors to borrow money or groceries. I don't think she realizes the account is empty. Let her, I said softly. It's her turn to experience the panic she's caused everyone else for years. It was clear she hadn't even considered backup plans. Everything was hinging on her ability to control the store, the delivery, the baking, the timing, everything she loved to micromanage. And now, without the funds she counted on, she was floundering. By 3:30, she had started calling the stores directly, demanding that they deliver items immediately. My parents had tried to explain that nothing could be done on such short notice, but she refused to listen. According to my mom, her tone went from frantic pleading to outright threats. Tell them they'll regret this. Tell them my family is counting on this dinner. If they can't get it here, I'll make sure everyone knows this is their fault. My mom sighed heavily. Asher, she's out of control. She's even threatening the clerks in the stores. I've never seen her like this. Meanwhile, I was sitting in my apartment, letting it all play out. I watched the clock tick toward 4 p.m. I didn't have to do anything. She was creating her own storm, and every decision she made was leading her deeper into panic. By 4:15, the voicemail count on my phone had grown. They were frantic, almost manic in tone, and she was leaving new messages every few minutes. My favorite, so far. Asher, this is ridiculous. The store says the turkey's gone, the pies aren't available, and the deliveries won't arrive for hours. You have to fix this. If I can't get everything, everyone's going to hate me. It wasn't just about the food. It was about her ego. Thanksgiving, in Kala's mind, was a performance, a demonstration that she could orchestrate perfection. The idea that the day might go wrong, and that she might be powerless to prevent it, was unbearable. And because I had quietly reversed the funds, she had no safety net. Then came the tipping point. At around 4:30, my mom called again, sounding more frantic than I had ever heard her. Asher, she's threatening to leave the house and come to you to get the money. She says she can't handle this and that you're the reason it's all falling apart. She's yelling at the dog now. I almost laughed aloud. The picture in my head was perfect. Kala, hair slightly disheveled, standing in the middle of the kitchen, yelling at anyone, or anything, that dared to exist while her dinner plans were unraveling. And that's when I realized something even better. She wasn't just panicking. She was going to try to escalate this in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. My parents were trying to calm her, but she refused to hear reason. The house was tense, the oven was empty, and the aroma of holiday cooking, so central to her elaborate plans, was missing entirely. Then, at exactly 4:45, my phone buzzed with another voicemail. I opened it with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. Her voice was shaking, almost hysterical. Asher, I don't care what it takes. I need the money, or the food, or someone help me, please. I can't host this dinner like this. Everyone's going to be disappointed. This is all your fault. I stopped it and just sat back, thinking. For years, she had pushed, manipulated, and controlled. For years, she had blamed me for imagined slights and inconveniences. And now, finally, she was facing the consequences of her own entitlement. I was about to learn, though, that her desperation had limits I hadn't predicted. What she did next changed everything, and it wasn't subtle. It wasn't minor. And it forced everyone in the house, including my parents, to confront just how far Kala would go to maintain control, even if it meant creating chaos for everyone around her. By 5 p.m., it was clear that Kala had crossed the point of mere panic. Now, she was operating on pure desperation, lashing out at anyone who stood in her way. My parents were trapped in a cycle of appeasement and bewilderment, trying to calm her while also managing the mounting chaos in the kitchen. I was far away, watching from my own quiet sanctuary, enjoying the fruits of a carefully laid plan. The first wave of disaster hit when she realized the turkey, the centerpiece of her carefully curated table, was no longer obtainable at any of the nearby stores. She had called every single place she could think of, speaking in increasingly sharp tones, shifting from pleading to veiled threats. According to my mom, she even tried to convince a delivery service to make an exception, insisting that the family would be furious if they failed. The delivery service, of course, politely declined. Asher, my mom whispered in despair during one of her calls to me. She's crying. She's yelling. She's pacing and screaming at the counters like they can do magic. Let her, I said, taking a sip of coffee. She spent decades thinking she could control everything. Now she's learning the hard way. By 5:30, she had moved beyond panic calls and was taking matters into her own hands, or at least attempting to. My mom described a scene that was equal parts tragic and absurd. Kala standing in the driveway, flustered and red-faced, juggling grocery bags, muttering about how this would ruin everything. Then, she started calling neighbors, demanding to borrow turkeys, pies, ingredients. My parents tried to explain that it wasn't appropriate to involve others in her meltdown, but she ignored them entirely. She's threatening to just leave the house and come to you, Asher, my dad said over the phone, voice tight. She says she'll get the money herself if she has to, and she's accusing you of deliberately sabotaging her. I let that sink in. Perfect. The beauty of this plan wasn't just about removing her control over the day. It was about letting her panic escalate, forcing her to confront the consequences of her own behavior. She had spent years manipulating everyone in the family, turning holidays into competitions for attention and dominance. Now, she was flailing in the spotlight she demanded. By 6 p.m., she realized that even the neighbors couldn't save her. No one could provide enough groceries or the turkey she wanted at that hour. The oven was empty, counters were scattered with half-prepared sides, and her signature pies remained unbaked. She had not anticipated any of this. She had assumed her money would always cover everything, that her charm and threats would always get results. Now, she was completely exposed. I could hear the desperation creeping into her voicemails. One of them, left just after 6, was almost comical in its panic. Asher, please, you can't just let this happen. I need this dinner, the turkey, the pies, the sides. If I can't pull this together, everyone's going to think I'm incompetent. You have to fix this. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The beauty of it was that she had no idea I had engineered this entire situation. The $5,000 she thought she could spend at Will was long gone, quietly returned to my account. Every frantic call, every frantic purchase attempt, every meltdown in the driveway. It was all part of the plan. At 6:30, she made the first move that showed just how far she would go to maintain appearances. According to my parents, she was attempting to salvage the dinner herself. But in her panic, she had made an almost comical series of mistakes. The sides she tried to cook were under-seasoned or burnt. The pie dough she attempted to roll out had stuck to the counter in one solid sheet. She had forgotten to thaw one of the key items, which now sat frozen and unusable. And yet, she refused to admit defeat. She called neighbors again, trying to commandeer ingredients, insisting that they would owe her if they helped. She even tried to convince a family friend, a retired chef, to come over and save the dinner at the last minute. No one could. By this point, the clock was well past 7, and dinner was scheduled for 7:30. I sat quietly in my apartment, listening to the updates from my parents. The scene at home was pure chaos. Kala, red-faced and frantic, was flinging ingredients around the kitchen, trying to multitask in ways that made no sense. She was arguing with the delivery drivers who had arrived too late, blaming them for her own lack of planning. She was threatening to cancel the dinner outright, insisting everyone should stay home and go hungry, rather than let the event be imperfect. Then, at 7 p.m., she crossed a line. My parents called me, voice shaking. "Asher, she's screaming at the family now. She's accusing you of sabotaging her, of trying to ruin Thanksgiving, and she's telling everyone not to eat until she fixes it. She's actually standing on a chair and pointing at everyone like she's in charge of some army." I leaned back, suppressing a laugh. The situation was surreal. Kala, who had spent years positioning herself as the ultimate authority in our family, was now reduced to chaos incarnate, desperate to enforce control she had lost hours ago. "She thinks if she makes everyone wait, it will magically fix itself," my mom said. "Asher, what do we do?" "Let her," I replied calm. "She's the one who created this. She wanted to control everything. Let her see the result." And then came the moment that sealed the evening. Kala, in her frantic state, tried to salvage the centerpiece of the dinner, the turkey. But in her panic, she hadn't fully read the instructions on the thawed one she had managed to grab. The oven, still empty for over an hour, finally was turned on, and she realized too late that it wasn't preheated correctly. She had no idea how long it would take, and now she was screaming at the oven itself. "This is ridiculous. I can't do this. Asher, you've ruined everything. Nobody will forgive me for this disaster." I could hear the despair in her voice, the absolute collapse of the image she had built for herself. Years of manipulation, entitlement, and control, all undone in a matter of hours. And she had no idea who, or what, had truly set the stage. I sat back and let it unfold, my mind racing with the possibilities. I hadn't even stepped into the house yet, and already, the first act of revenge had played out perfectly. Kala's frantic energy, the incomplete dinner, the empty oven, and the frustrated family, they were all living proof that entitlement has consequences, even if the person experiencing them refuses to see it. By 7:15, my parents were doing their best to salvage what remained of the dinner. Kala was arguing over trivial details, the placement of napkins, the temperature of the pies, the timing of the stuffing. She was so absorbed in her own panic that she didn't notice the utter collapse of her carefully orchestrated event. And that's when I realized she was about to do something drastic, something that would completely expose her, and in a way she could never recover from. What she did next wasn't just panic. It was full-blown desperation, a combination of manipulation and recklessness that would bring the entire night to a breaking point. By 7:20 p.m., the situation in my parents' house had reached a level of chaos that was almost cinematic. Kala, frantic beyond reason, had taken over every available surface in the kitchen. Pots and pans were precariously stacked on the counters, ingredients spilled across the marble, and utensils lay abandoned in half-prepped dishes. She moved between tasks like a whirlwind, muttering to herself about how everyone would judge her if anything went wrong. Her voice carried the sharp edge of desperation, punctuated by muttered threats and exclamations that seemed meant for no one in particular. My parents were attempting to mediate, hovering behind her, trying to gently suggest compromises, rearranging items, or offering minor solutions. Every time they spoke, Kala twisted their words into accusations. "You're siding with him. You're trying to undermine me. Stop interfering with my dinner," she shouted, swiping at a pile of flour that had accidentally spilled onto the counter. The kitchen had become a storm zone. The scent of burnt bread and half-cooked vegetables mixed with the sharp tang of raw onions. My mom tried to step in, carefully, but Calla barely noticed her, too consumed by her imagined catastrophes. She seemed convinced that if she didn't maintain complete control, the holiday would collapse entirely, and that every family member would judge her mercilessly. It was then, as if the final thread of her composure snapped, that she made the decision that would tip the scales completely. Grabbing her phone like it was a lifeline, she darted toward the front door. She didn't just walk. She practically flung herself into the driveway, yelling over her shoulder. According to my mom, she was nearly vibrating with panic. "Asher, you have to fix this right now. I can't do it. If dinner isn't perfect, it's your fault. I don't care if it's too late. I need you to." And then she stopped mid-sentence, confusion replacing the panic as she realized the driveway was empty. She had assumed, as she always did, that I would answer immediately, that I would swoop in and rescue her like I had countless times before. But I hadn't. I wasn't going to. I sent a single text. "Check your account balance." There was a long silence, then the frantic scrolling, the tapping and swiping as she tried to reconcile the numbers on her screen with the expectations she had built for the day. Within moments, the reality hit her like a freight train. The $5,000 she had assumed would cover every extravagant detail. The turkey, the sides, the pies, even the specialty bread she insisted on, was gone. Returned quietly, secretly, to me. Every frantic purchase, every last-minute scheme, had been impossible because the funds she relied upon no longer existed. My mom later described the look on her face as she returned to the kitchen. Pure disbelief mixed with rage, a storm of emotions that left her nearly incoherent. She stormed back inside, flinging accusations at anyone nearby, from the delivery drivers who had arrived late to the grocery store clerks who had no control over inventory. And, of course, to me. "Asher did this. He sabotaged me. He wants me to fail," she screamed, voice echoing off the walls, fingers pointing wildly at anyone who dared approach. My parents were exhausted and embarrassed, trying everything they could to calm her down. My mom, in a quiet attempt at diplomacy, suggested a small compromise. "Calla, let's just use what we have and rearrange the menu. It'll be fine." She refused, shaking her head violently, eyes wide and furious. She couldn't accept imperfection. The illusion of control was everything to her, the very essence of her self-image, and now it had crumbled. She wouldn't allow reality to intrude on the fantasy she had meticulously crafted. By 8 p.m., the house had quieted in the sense that most people had stopped speaking. The occasional mutter or muttered curse from Calla cut through the air, but otherwise, it was a tense, heavy silence. She scoured the kitchen relentlessly, tossing aside anything she deemed substandard, inspecting every pan, dish, and ingredient as if one minor imperfection would spell catastrophe. The oven, long forgotten in the rush, had cooled down, and the pies that had never been started remained in their doughy form on the counter. The turkey, the centerpiece of her meticulously imagined table, was nowhere in sight. My parents quietly set a few simple sides on the table: bread, butter, some canned vegetables, and a couple of store-bought pies. The grandeur Calla had promised, the table set like a magazine spread, with each dish perfectly executed, was gone. Completely gone. And yet, Calla did not relent. She continued to rage, turning her frustration outward. Anyone who entered the kitchen became a target, including family members who were simply trying to eat or help. Every mistake, every shortcoming, was blamed on me. She accused me of deliberately stealing her money, of trying to ruin the holiday, and of undermining her life. She never paused to consider that her frantic overplanning, entitlement, and refusal to adapt had created this mess entirely on her own. I didn't show up. I didn't reply to a single message. I let her unravel fully. She paced the kitchen, throwing down utensils, alternating between shouting and crying, lashing out at anyone within reach. My parents eventually gave up on mediation, quietly setting plates down for the family members who had gathered, most of whom were confused and uncomfortable, unsure of whether to intervene or just eat whatever they could salvage. Around 9:15 p.m., I received one last voicemail. It was broken, frantic, and dripping with panic. "Asher, I don't understand. How did this happen? The money, the groceries, everything is gone. This is a disaster. Everyone's going to think I'm incompetent. Please, tell me what to do." I smiled quietly. There was nothing to fix. She had learned the lesson in the most humbling way possible. Entitlement has limits, and the world does not bend to accommodate ego. The following day, my parents attempted to lecture me on family unity and helping her in moments of need. I reminded them politely that I had only returned the funds I had originally set aside, and they didn't press further. They had seen the full extent of Kala's panic and manipulation, and they knew that she had created this disaster herself. Kala, of course, never admitted her mistakes. In her mind, it was all sabotage, a deliberate act of cruelty on my part. She avoided eye contact at every meal for the following week, and even our extended family noticed a subtle but palpable shift in her demeanor. The aura of control she had wielded for decades was gone, replaced with frantic defensiveness and visible embarrassment. Thanksgiving, in the end, passed with a simplified, quiet meal. I stayed home, relaxed, and let her deal with the consequences of her own behavior. She never fully recovered her sense of entitlement, and every future family gathering carried a subtle tension. Everyone remembered the chaos of that year. As for me, I finally allowed myself a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. For once, the entitled family member had experienced the fallout of her own actions. She had demanded control, refused to adapt, and created chaos. I had merely nudged the scales, and the results were spectacular. Kala's lesson was simple but unavoidable. Entitlement without responsibility collapses under pressure. I didn't intervene. I didn't rescue her. I simply let her face the consequences, and in doing so, finally leveled the playing field. She remained bitter for months afterward, blaming everyone but herself. I, on the other hand, spent the evening and the following weeks quietly enjoying the knowledge that her panic, desperation, and manipulative tendencies had finally caught up with her. Thanksgiving was never the same again. Kala continued to attempt control over family gatherings, but the memory of that disastrous holiday hung over her like a shadow. Every time she even hinted at being in charge, the family remembered the chaos, the flailing, and the collapse of her perfectly constructed holiday. I, meanwhile, relished the quiet victory. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting someone else crash spectacularly while you remain completely unscathed. And for once, I had done exactly that. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.